Welcome to the 2021 Legislative Conversations virtual event. I'm Daxton Mays, Chairman of the Governmental Affairs Committee for the Hartsville Area Chamber of Commerce. The Hartsville Area Chamber of Commerce is committed to engaging our business community in the legislative process and want to take this opportunity to engage our businesses with our legislative body here in the local area. This event is generally part of our State of the State address and breakfast. However, this year we are offering this as a virtual event. Some of the questions you'll hear during this event came from the polling of our membership and community members to get their feedback to what they want to hear about and what they want to hear from our legislators. We are excited to be able to present this, and you will get to hear from our local legislative body, and we hope you enjoy.
In the second of 5 videos, we are going to be addressing community enhancement. Community enhancement is one of the pillars of the Hartsville Area Chamber, and you're going to hear questions regarding how our state is helping our region grow, how our state representatives and senators are working to help direct funding into our area, to encourage population growth, business growth, and even helping our law enforcement. So we hope you'll take time and enjoy this next segment and learn a lot.
I want to just take a quick second and explain that as a chamber, we have about 5 different, we call them task forces. And those task forces represent the areas in our community where we see there's needs and ways that we can help support it. Those task forces are government affairs and advocacy, leadership and networking, workforce and education. We also have business development, and then lastly, our community enhancement task force. So while there might be some overlap, we feel like each one of these task forces represent the ways that we can support our community in the best possible way. So I want to make, as we go into our questions, I want to sort of focus our questions on those different areas. So starting out, I want to address questions in our governmental affairs and advocacy category. So I'm going to flip through my pages here a little bit. This first one's for you, Parker. And in our governmental affairs bucket, here is a question. Why is it so important that COVID-19 stimulus checks are not taxed by the state and government? Isn't this just the government theoretically handing out more money than they already have? I think all of us have a lot of questions about all the COVID stimulus money that's being distributed, and whether or not it's needed or not needed, and what's going to be the impact of that long term. So let me ask that again. Why is it so important that these stimulus checks are not taxed by the state and, I guess, federal government?
Right. Well, I don't think you will see it taxed by the state. I think the governor's already put out an order saying that it will not be taxed on the state level, in which the stimulus came down from the federal level. So, we didn't really have anything to do with it. And I think that, it's vital and important to the people who have truly, lost their income and they need a little help. But I think that, some of us that receive checks might not necessarily need it as much as others do, and they could kind of recraft that as well. But from a state standpoint, I don't believe that you will see any kind of tax increase, but who knows what the federal government will do with that. I hope that they will take that tax burden off the people who truly need it.
And in that line, again, one of the purposes of this is to help educate the community about your limits, your power and your limits. And so how much do you all affect the impact of what happens at the federal level?
Well, I was going to say, it's key for us as state legislators to build a good rapport with our national and our federal congressmen and congresswomen and U.S. senators. And so we are the bridge between to reach out to them, if you will, in some instances. And so that relationship, and I think I can speak on behalf of Scott as well, we built a good relationship with our whole Alabama delegation. And, I think that pays dividends in order to be able to relay a message from our constituents onto the federal level.
That's good. Scott, do you have any comments about that? About how much are you, as a state legislator, able to impact what's happening at a federal level?
Well, not much as far as voting and getting stuff done like we can in Montgomery. I do want to talk about the question that Parker kind of touched on. There's a lot of families who are hurting in this pandemic, and they're really struggling. And the problem that I have with these checks that are being mailed out is there's a lot of families who don't need them. Myself and my wife and I, we don't need them. And I think, you find out who does need them and who is actually struggling to pay rent and put food on the table for their kids. Those are the people who do need assistance. Myself and others like me, we do not. Yes. And that's the problem, and you can't mail it back.
Yes.
So that has to be fixed. And I will say Representative Andy Witt, he's got a piece of legislation this session about the state tax part of the checks, and of course the governor's on top of it. But I don't think that as a state will not tax, but the federal, we don't know what will take place, like Parker said. And everybody's probably a little scared of what's going on in D.C. right now. And just how I address it is through prayer and faith. And I know that we've got good people in the state of Alabama, in our state house, and I'm not worried about back home as much as I am on a national level. But I think, we need to hopefully redirect, or, that relationship we built with our congressmen and senators, they're taking it from all sides as well. So it's tough you can get a phone call in and you can talk to them and express your concerns, but they're weighing waiters right now in D.C., that's for sure.
Yeah, thank you. This is in the same vein. We talked about those stimulus checks coming to individual families, but what about businesses? This is another question we received from the community. How will the downstream effect on businesses be for the government relief provided during the COVID pandemic? Again, this is back to, will the state plan to tax businesses that received relief packages, PPP money, some of those other loan efforts that were put out? Is there an expectation that the state will tax for those funding? I'm assuming no, but we'll just let you address that.
Well, yeah, thank you. I don't believe you will see it. I think it's going to be the same as, individual. We see that the people are hurting, and, we don't want to exploit that. And we want to maintain and make sure that, they stay open and a viable business. That's our first priority, and I think that, when this whole pandemic started and they came out with the CARES Act funding and all, the federal government never really gave us clear guidelines as to how that could be distributed. How, can it go to this? Can it go to that? We as a state didn't really know, and we were left kind of scrambling to figure it out, and we had people reaching out to us asking, hey, how do we get this? How do we get that? And I'm still having businesses that are reaching out to me that have had a significant drop in income because of this virus, primarily like travel industries and, some of those type of businesses that didn't qualify. And I would think that, we need to go back in and try to reach out to our federal delegation and get some of that tweaked for a next stimulus, or if you will, if another one winds up coming, that will help address some of those issues to help those that kind of got left behind.
Well, word is that it's probably coming, so
yes.
We'll hang on for that. Anything you'd like to add to that?
I want to start off by saying truly our hearts goes out to the restaurants and the retailers who have been impacted by this pandemic. Even we went to a drive-in movie for the social distancing not too long ago, and just thinking of how impactful this was just for the movie industry in itself. I know those guys are hurting. I know that Montgomery is doing everything they can. The CARES Act money, the deadline's passed, and we have leftovers. My understanding is the leftovers are going to go into the unemployment bank account, so it can help with that. We've had a significant amount of unemployment throughout this. I know Parker, as well as myself, we have been doing work, nonstop work, helping people get their benefits. The problem is that office was just flooded, and we really had to go the extra mile to make sure these people were taken care of. And that frustrates me even more, because when the federal government sends out checks and we're all receiving checks, and you see people who are truly hurting, who truly need the help, and here we are, can't get to them because there's so many of them. So I think we learned a lot during this pandemic. I think that Montgomery and our state legislation is going to be eyeing this next time, so we're prepared better. As far as the CARES Act money, I would love for us to get more for our businesses, because they're still hurting. Even though our budgets throughout the year are good, believe it or not, they're good. You know, our Educational Trust Fund is doing very well. I'm going to let Senator Arthur Orr talk more about that, because he's the chairman of that in the Senate. So we're doing good as a state. We've got the right people in the right places. And, you know, having a rolling reserve really helped us. There's other states that are really hurting right now financially, and we are not. We're not one of those states because of the people and the programs that we had in place. So that's a good thing for the state of Alabama.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? You're educating me. What is a rolling reserve, and how has that benefited us?
So basically, the Rolling Reserve Act is it's a fiscal conservative budget, and they're always going to put X number of percentages in a savings account. So, and it just rolls over, and it's an account that creates interest. So, in other words, when we have a pandemic or if something hits us, we have a savings account to be able to use.
Yes. And have we accessed that during this pandemic?
I think they've accessed it a little bit.
Okay.
Yes. I was going to say we have, and we had about $500 million in the rolling reserve, which actually help give, rolling reserve is with the Education Trust Fund, and I think Senator Orr can expand on this a little bit, but we had about $500 million in reserve, and we're able to give at least a 2 to 3% increase in funding in just about every department within the education field.
That's good. That's very good. You know, at one time I thought it feels like during this pandemic that we're in the, for those of you that know your children's Bible stories, it's like Joseph, that we've been storing up for the days ahead. So it's good to hear that we're in that position, and we definitely need wisdom and leaders like you all in the years ahead to be distributing what's been stored up with wisdom. So thank you for that. Parker, I've got another one for you. This is a question. Let me just go ahead and dive in here. It says, is there a reason you cannot initiate putting forth a letter from Alabama to Congress in holding Facebook, Google, and others accountable for infringing on the rights of freedom of speech? If no reason, will you do so? And I think to reframe that, can we as state legislators, do you have any authority to get into that field?
We have the authority to write a letter of support to our federal delegation, but it would have to come down from the federal government. And our federal delegation, you know, I think is taking steps right now to ensure that we maintain our free speech. And, you know, I think that's vital for our country and our republic that we have. You know, it's one of the key cornerstones of our foundation, you know, is the right to free speech and to express yourself.
So, Scott, is there anything happening at the state level to help protect free speech for Alabamians?
The Constitution. That's
Yeah. We must make sure it's upheld.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Good. This is really a hot topic. Anything else y'all want to say about that before we move on? I know there's a lot of anxiety and concern about what they're seeing in the media. And, you know, there is a concern that we're going to lose ground in that area. So anything y'all want to, any more you want to say about that as state legislators?
Well, I would like to say, like I said earlier, I rely on prayer and faith to guide me through difficult times. And the state of Alabama has some good people in your leadership. And that's I focus on that. I focus on our leadership that we have representing us in D.C., which is good representation of where we stand. Right now, they're in a battle. I mean, it's a tough battle. And it's a very scary time for us. But I truly believe that God is in control, and I think He's going to give our representation up there the wisdom and the strength and the direction to go to better serve us and protect us from what we're seeing. I mean, it's just a year ago, we would have never imagined we're in this position, ever. I think we are definitely going to focus on our voting, make sure that it is solid and sound. I will say in the state of Alabama, we were sound. We did do good. We had good numbers. And John Merrill he does a phenomenal job as Secretary of State. But, we need to address and make sure that our voting is where it needs to be. And it's safe and secure for the citizens of Alabama. There is some legislation that's coming through that is wanting to broaden the mail-in. And I can assure you I will fight it on top of this table.
Absolutely.
Because we need to tighten instead of loosen.
Yep. And you rolled right into the next questions that we had in this bucket. How do you feel about legislation which would make provisions to guarantee safe and secure voting in Alabama with stiff penalties for voter fraud convictions? So, of course, that's kind of a general question. What does that look like? What does it look like to have stiff penalties for voter fraud convictions? Is that something that is being investigated on an ongoing basis? And how can you all influence the ability for us to have the confidence that there is safe and secure voting happening here in the state of Alabama?
Well, I think I can speak on behalf of Scott and everybody else, all the other legislators down in Montgomery, when I say election integrity is vital to the importance, or it's vital to our state and our country and ensuring election integrity. It's another one of the cornerstones of our foundation is a free and fair elections. And I think a lot of people feel that is being violated right now. And here in Alabama, we're very fortunate to have, like Scott said, Secretary of State John Merrill, that has helped ensure that we have free and fair elections that have not been tampered with or whatnot. And we're very blessed, as we've seen all across the country, that some of these states had voter fraud and everything else, and like I said, we're very fortunate in our state to where we don't really have that. So,
how do you influence it? How do you help to guarantee that we have safe and secure voting in Alabama?
Well, number one, we fight legislation that weakens it, like we will be doing this year. I know of 2 bills for sure that addresses loosening, and we will be fighting it. We will make sure that it does not go through. Also, we can file legislation to tighten it and make it stronger. My biggest concerns with all the elections is the mail-in votes. We've got to make sure that every accurate vote, legal vote, is counted and every illegal vote is not counted. I know the Secretary of State office get suggestions and complaints all the time, and they investigate them, and they do a phenomenal job with that. But all we can control is within our state lines, but that's what we will do. I assure the people of our districts in the state that we will stand and we will protect for that.
I had a question, and I'm not seeing it right now, but someone was wondering, is it reasonable to think that we'll ever get to the place where voting can happen at home in a safe and secure manner with things like facial identification and having to scan driver's licenses or other things? Do you think we can ever get to the point where that type of at-home voting can be safe and secure?
No, ma'am. I don't. I don't. That opens up the door to more fraud. And I mean, that's where we're talking about on some other legislation.
Yes.
When you take it behind closed doors and you're not showing up to the polls, that opens Pandora's box to fraud.
Yes.
Now, there are some people who don't have the privilege of going to their voting box, and they need to do a mail-in ballot. But they also need to have their driver's license, their documentation, and to make sure they're legit and they're, and it's accounted for them.
Yeah, I think Alabama's voting method should be a model for the rest of the country, the way we do it.
All right, we're going to shift a little bit. Now we're going to talk about some government affair issues. You've already addressed some of these, but I'm going to ask some of them to clarify. What will the downstream effect on businesses be for the government relief provided during the COVID pandemic? Does the state plan to recoup the money through increasing taxes and licensing in the future? You had mentioned that you're already getting ready to propose protection, liability protection, but what about the potential for taxing on the relief that these businesses have received from the government?
Right. As I said, that's in this legislation that's going to be a priority bill, that people would not be taxed on the funds that they received. So it makes no sense to give with one hand and take with the other. So that legislation should sail through. I wouldn't see a problem.
Good. Also in this arena, it's been a hot topic recently about voter security. And so for you, in my opinion, Alabama does a great job with the voting process and voter security. However, the process is antiquated, in the opinion of this questioner. Can you foresee a day when I will be able to download a Morgan County voter app on my phone, log in with facial recognition for security, register to vote with links to my driver's license or E-Verify, then cast a ballot on election day, hit submit, and you're done? This eliminates mail-in ballots, absentee votes, paper ballots, and having to go to a polling location. Voters that don't have a phone could go to the courthouse or city hall to vote in person. Do you have any thoughts on Alabama's voting process in the future?
I think that's an excellent question. I can vision it. It may take a while. I know with some people's security concerns over facial recognition software and all that, but I do see it as probably where we'll wind up in a decade or two. I looked at this issue several years ago when I noticed in other states they were allowing ballot harvesting, and that's where I'm just making up an example, but you order a bunch of ballots for people in the rest home, and you fill them out supposedly with the input of the tenant or the residents, and then send them all in or collect a lot of ballots. We don't allow that in Alabama. Some states do. Our laws are, as the questioner said, a little bit antiquated, but they are not like they have in Georgia or some of these other states that had such issues. And I think Secretary of State Merrill has done a good job of doing all we can to modernize within the current context. Going forward, again, I could see it going to e-voting and with adequate security measures. But when you get into hackers and stealing of elections and all that, you just better make sure it's secure, because imagine if people lost confidence in our system here in Alabama, that their ballots were truly counted and not manipulated by some nefarious party.
There's nothing like a human showing up at the polls, is there?
And filling in with a pen a little box and
That's
having
right.
it counted. But
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's all. I know these are questions that are going to be asked for many years to come. All right, we're going to move to another question in the same arena. This is specifically to you. Will you put forth legislation to clean the voter registration rolls? And how does that differ from the question that was asked earlier?
Well, I think the
previous question was more how you vote and what we go through to vote and making sure people are identified correctly. You know, not all states require voter ID, that you have to submit a voter ID card. They just allow you to come up and say, I'm Mary Smith, and vote, and they don't require it. I forget which state had to go all the way to the Supreme Court to allow voter IDs where you had a photographic ID. This question tends to relate more to the roles or who is eligible to vote. My understanding, again, is that Secretary Merrill, and since he's been in office, has done a good job of purging voters who have moved, voters that are deceased, and upgrading our voter list quite more frequently than had been done in the past. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's much improved over where it was 10 years ago.
Well, is there really a need for legislation? Are these historically, has cleaning the voter registration roll, has that just been a policy or has it been a matter of legislation?
We've passed some bills here in the last 5, 6, 7 years related to voter rolls and upgrading them. And so legislation has been passed to modernize and to upgrade the accuracy of our voter rolls. My recollection in all this, but I think, again, Secretary Merrill's very conscientious about this, and I think if there were a need, he would offer up such legislation. But that's certainly something I can look into to make sure, because the questioner is correct, we need to make sure they're accurate and that dead people aren't voting however they could or would.
I think another question that this was not presented, but something that is in my mind too, is what role does the legislature play in, for example, we saw in some states where the Secretary of State and others were making decisions about which votes would be accepted and which wouldn't, and the claim was that those things bypassed the legislature's need to vote on those. So here in the state of Alabama, how does that procedure work? You know, those were things that happened as a result of the pandemic, and you know, people felt like those things needed to happen. So,
yeah. So that's kind of a complex question. The Constitution says that the state legislature shall establish what the rules are for elections in their state. What we had with COVID, you had certain Secretary of States changing or making rules. However, under the statutory authority that had been given them by the legislature of that state, they were operating under that statutory authority, not making up rules that were in contravention of that, but going along with the authority that had been given them or delegated to them by the state legislature. We had a situation here in Alabama where Secretary Merrill said those that have COVID concerns because of COVID and people standing in long lines can vote absentee. Well, if you notice on your absentee list of excuses, there were you had to be sick or very sick. Well, you know, these are people just concerned about catching the virus, but he did a rule change in Alabama, which he was entitled to do, to allow for that to happen in Alabama, to people to vote absentee. So I don't want to be hypocritical about it where certain states, you know, had this authority, and Secretary Merrill, I believe under his delegated authority, I didn't hear any challenge to that he was wrong or in error. Yeah. I didn't look into it personally, but I believe that he operated accordingly.
If there are concerns, those authorities would need to be reconsidered at the legislative
we could pass
later.
a law and say you don't have the authority to pass a rule, which he did, where public can comment, and it's a procedural type step that's done. You give out public notice, the public has a right to comment, and make a rule, have a rulemaking there in the Secretary of State's office. If we believe as a legislature he exceeded his authority, we can certainly limit that going forward.
Yes, that's helpful. That's helpful. I think it's reassuring to know that you all are still at the end of the day, y'all are the ones that are able to oversee what our Secretary of State is doing. And
Well, the
giving
problem
authorities
is
it
we're
needs.
not in session all the time. And that's, he made the rulemaking, I believe, during the summer. The legislature had adjourned. What recourse do we have to say, no, we don't agree with that, we don't approve of that? Very little. So that's always a problem because we're not a full-time legislature.
Yeah.
Not advocating for that, but
Yeah.
we're limited on what we can do.
Okay. In terms of that, is there a reason why you would or would not initiate putting forth a letter from Alabama to Congress supporting term limits, to our U.S. Congress?
Right. I've voted for this in the past. We had resolutions and things like they've not been successful. Believe that it is best that at the federal level we have term limits, and then have voted for this at the state level that we have term limits, and believe strongly that it would help the system better. Now, some people say 8 years. I think somewhere between 12 and 16 should be the maximum. Some states find that if they make them too short, it creates a situation where the lobbyists and the bureaucrats are in charge because your legislators are too new or too green and don't understand the process very well, and it puts those that are there for decades in charge, in a sense. So there is an area there, but I don't believe the founders had in mind a perpetual group. I mean, people say, well, you've been in there a while, but I see it until we pass a uniform rule, I'm a little bit concerned about just saying, okay, because term limits, I'm going to hang it up. And then other legislators are in there for 25, 30 years, however long, and they're able to get positions to help their areas, and I step down just as this area goes back to zero, so to speak, as far as the seniority that the membership has.
Yes, that's good.
We want to thank you for joining in to this event. We hope you found it educational, and we hope that you learned something and became a little bit closer to our legislators and our legislative process. The Governmental Affairs Committee is going to offer several other opportunities throughout the year, one being a trip to Montgomery to meet with our legislators. We're also going to be having a State of the City address, a State of the Schools address, a State of Healthcare address, and we're also going to be reaching into the local communities to hear about what's going on with some of our surrounding areas. Lastly, we're going to be working to develop our public policy agenda for the 2021-2022 year, and we're asking for volunteers. We would love to have you join in, make your voice heard, and be a part of our committee as we move forward and work to move Hartsville in the right direction.
If these sessions have been helpful to you, please take a moment and reach out to your state legislator or senator and let him know how much. You can find a way to contact them at our website at www.hartsvillechamber.com and go to our legislative resources page. We hope you understand that the Hartsville Area Chamber of Commerce exists to serve you. As a nonprofit, we accomplish the task of helping to make Hartsville and the surrounding area a better place to live, work, and play through volunteer leadership. So come join us. Find a way to plug in and to get involved and work together to help make this the best place to live, to work, and to play.